of course, is the classic example of it. During the last ice age, 20,000 years ago, the Sahara Desert became grassland and lightly wooded area, what they call now in Africa savanna. And of course, one of the interesting things about that was that that allowed people to get out of Africa across the Sahara Desert, which prior to that was really a huge barrier to movement. But and by the way, those wetter regions in the desert areas, those are called pluvials, from the Latin word for rain. They are now in an interpluvial, that is, they're in an arid time period. In the polar regions, we're in an interglacial, and 20,000 years ago, which even in human terms is yesterday, we were in a glacial. And so what I've described for you then are the three different forms of ice. One is the sea ice, that is water freezing to form the sea ice. The second is the glaciers forming into brittle ice, the upper layer of it, and then the plastic layer beneath it, which causes the glacier to flow. Now, to go back to the Arctic ice, which was part of the original question, Arctic ice is already in the ocean. The ice is formed by water from the ocean freezing. And by the way, it freezes at a different temperature than fresh water because of the salt in it. Now, people know about that because you've got ice on your sidewalk, you throw salt on it, causes the ice to melt. So that fresh water starts to freeze at about 2 degrees Celsius, and sea ice doesn't start to freeze till about minus 4 degrees Celsius. There's a full 6 degrees Celsius difference between the freezing of sea ice. But as the seawater freezes into sea ice, it freezes out as fresh ice. So if you were to take a chunk of frozen seawater, it would be fresh water. Now that, of course, is making it makes it tempting for people towing ice and getting fresh water supplies and so on. But a lot of people say, "Oh no, I've tasted the ice by the ocean and it tastes salty." Well, that's because of the salt spray and the salt that's in the air around the oceans. And but sea ice, and that one, by the way, was a very interesting question when the two astronomers, Wales and Diamond, were sent by the Royal Society to Churchill on Hudson Bay. One of the things they were asked to do was to determine if sea ice was fresh water or salt water. And it just simply wasn't known at that time.
I think most of us would assume it would be salt water.
Of course. But you see, one of the things, you remember the term freeze-dried coffee?
Yes. Terrible.
Well, that what they're telling you is the process by which it's another form of distillation. Like distillation is when you boil the water and you get water evaporating off of it. If you condense that water, then it's much purer water. That's what distilled water is, right? It leaves all the junk and the minerals behind. Well, the same thing is when water freezes, there's a distillation process going on. The ice that's formed out of that frozen water leaves behind the impurities and the salt.
So can I bring us back for just a moment?
Yeah.
Okay. I want you to be able to finish what you're saying, but I want to bring us back. So How do we, the public, non-climatologists, how will we ever know if the glaciers are melting or whether they're just growing and breaking off? What is distinguishing our ability to know that for a fact? Obviously, we can't rely on the press for this.
No.
We can't rely on the traditional press for this. It seems to be around the world because I'm looking at the RSOE, the Emergency and Disaster Information Services for Budapest, Hungary, when I'm talking to you about these articles, which also have videos, by the way.
Yeah.
So what do we do to actually know the distinction? There's got to be some precursors to the glaciers are growing and then building and breaking off versus they're melting.
Yeah, of course, the first thing that you need to know is that you need to look at the source of the information. If it's from the media, it's almost invariably going to be sensationalist, because journalists learn very quickly that if it isn't sensational, their editor isn't going to publish it. And of course, trying to fill a 24-hour news cycle demands increasingly bizarre stories.
But let me tell you how pervasive it is. I'm looking at a emergency and disaster information service Budapest, Hungary website with different sources, obviously, of news, you know, like the AP for LA Times and Planet Ski and RIA Novosti, tvnz.co.New Zealand. In other words, they gather data from different places, so it's very hard for us not to be ingesting this as the reality going on. Can you see how pervasive it is?
Oh, sure. And that's the consensus argument. Look, all these other sites are saying this, so it must be true. But what you find is that most of it's originated from a single story that's been planted by somebody who has an agenda. I mean, and one of the things that I've watched occur over the last 35 years is the media monitoring certain journals like Nature or Science, looking for articles that have what could be turned into a sensational argument. You can say, well, it's in this scientific journal. Most of the time, it's a scientist speculating. And then most of the time, and this is something I've grappled with for a long time, Kim, is that when you read the article, it has all of the conditional words in it. It says, it could or it may, and that's something people need to look at. How often are those conditional words in there? How often is it, well, this may happen or this could happen, not that this is happening. And then what happens is, so those are in the article, and you'll find a lot more of them in the original piece. And by the way, if you go and read the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, the science report, not the summary for policymakers, which of course they've made sensational because they're trying to influence policy, but you go and read what the scientists are actually saying, you'd be saying, what's the worry? These people are admitting they know virtually nothing. And one of the things that I've been working on is pulling out these pieces from the science report and saying, well, look, this is what they actually said, and here's how it arrived. And it's not without reason that the summary for policymakers, which is released to the media a few months ahead of the science report, that was set up deliberately so that the more sensationalist aspects of it would have an influence upon people and the policymakers, because, of course, they're looking for more funding. And one of the things, that's the first thing. The second thing is, when you read the headline, and you've been around in media enough to know that the headlines have to be sensational. They have to be in the active voice. They have to grab your attention. That's what they're for.
Well, they're definitely very, very fearful. There is a phenomenon I do want to talk to you about that's associated with this, and I don't want to detract from the focus of the segment, but I do want to say this to you. It is obvious to many people around the world that there is and appears to be extreme weather going on in different countries of the world in many, many different ways. And I know now that extreme weather has been around forever, all over the world for millions of years. But we happen to all be alive at a time where we are observing extreme weather happening in different places. And the thing is, even if there is extreme weather happening, flooding or a lot of rain in one place, a volcano erupting in Iceland and earthquakes happening here and there, it seems as if all of this is being placed inside the conversation of climate change, inside global warming as the reason. I think I read something a couple of weeks ago. I can't remember who said it, but somebody said it's cooling around the world because of global warming.
Yep.
It was crazy. It's like grasping at straws.
Yep.
The thing is, what do you say about the extreme weather issue on its own?
Well, I love the comment that I can't attribute it to anybody, but somebody said that the unusual weather is more unusual than usual.
It'd be good to find out who said that. That's funny.
Yeah, it would. But there's a couple of things about it, Kim. One is, of course, that I've already mentioned, the 24-hour sensational news cycle. The other thing is that things can go on, and we're not aware of them. And it's much like if you're introduced to somebody, it seems like every time you turn around after that, there they are. They were always there. They were just not part of your...
they weren't on the radar.
Yeah.